A few years back, I made a video on the channel about the Rolex Air-King and titled it something like The Unsung Hero, and the aim was to highlight that it had a great history and background, but it was one that few took time to notice or pay attention to. And every single year, every one of us, me included, kept repeating ourselves that the Air-King would be discontinued, because it was never the popular model in the catalogue, and frankly, it sits today in an area where it doesn't really belong as a part of Rolex's modern lineup. I think it's safe to say that we were all quite shocked. Instead of Rolex discontinuing the model, they in fact reintroduced it with a bit of a twist, a bit of a flair into their new collection. Instead of going down the route of streamlining or identifying the core traits that has come to define the Air-King over the decades, whatever they may be, Rolex actually did the opposite and doubled down on the quirkiness and tuned it up nicely in a lot of areas. And this is very unlike modern Rolex. I'm all for it. Because as much as predictable releases are great, the unpredictable ones will always keep us talking and engaged for longer. But something that has been the topic of conversation between enthusiasts and veterans of this hobby is that people really want this watch. For some, this has become their primary pursuit. Is this because it is new watch syndrome? Is it because the brand has actually improved on all the areas that people wanted to see changed on this model? Or is it simply because Steel Sports Rolex is untouchable? The thirst for them unquenchable. I must have been having a whiskey when I wrote this. The question I pose to all of you and hope to expand: should Rolex kill the Air-King line altogether? Is this an example of a watch that says it's gone too far? Or is it a piece that points the design in the right direction? Right, on the wrist today is the Pelagos FXD. Still get such a kick out of this watch. And I've paired this watch with a navy and white Watch Gecko signature NATO strap. The coloring, the quality of material, it's fantastic. These are the only straps I wear with this watch, and I think I have 4 of them of different colors. Okay, I think it's fair to say that most of us probably don't think about the Air-King when we talk about the crown. It's not a watch that sits foremost in our minds. I wouldn't even say it's ranked in the top 10 watches that the brand produces. And even with the sudden arrival of this new update, we are still more eager to talk about the GMTs and the Sky-Dwellers first. Fantastic original watches. I mean, the GMT was born to be a time zone traveler, and the Sky-Dweller, a watch that needs another video from yours truly. It's such an enigmatic culmination of the golden age of flight, the luxury and prestige married with a unique design that only belongs in Rolex's lexicon. I would argue that the Sky-Dweller is Rolex's greatest modern achievement next to the icons they introduced in the 1950s. Like, it's that important. But the Air-King isn't like any of these. It's very clear that the modern language used to describe it, it is aimed at being an instrument, and even though it's a severe departure from the image we have in our heads, and actually the original Air-King was built around this theme even as far back as 1945. The Second World War ended, and with it came many more military contracts. We've covered a lot of these before. Names like JLC and IWC with the Mark 11. Amazing machines given to the RAF. And the name Rolex was also a part of this contract series, and they produced watches for the RAF. They introduced the Air series of watches. Now hold on to this. The Air Giant, the Air Lion, the Air Tiger, and the Air King. I wish I was making this up. So could someone please tell me what an Air Lion even is? An Air Tiger? I'm sorry, it doesn't make a lick of sense. And the Air-King was also a part of this package, and it's very obvious that it was the one that stood the test of time. The reference 4925 set the ball in motion. Soon after, we would see the reference 4499, 2 stunning models that capture that 1930s, late 1940s feel. And by the time we hit 1953, so we see the reference 6652 introduced, and these ones really characterize the direction of the sports line. How we see bracelets introduced with these models. How we see those gorgeous alpha hands that came to define the classic Air-King collection. Soon after, the legendary reference 5500 arrives, and the design and the shape defines the Air-King for over 30 years. And here we see examples of the model that really simplified the formula. Applied stick batons, basic pencil hands. Something that's often spoken about in our community is the reference 5500 Explorer dial, and while yes, this watch was 34mm, it wasn't linked to the 1016 or any of the previous generations by any means. It was its own unique watch. But the problem is, and be warned, it is the most faked watch dial today. Just know that the genuine, the non-replacement reference 5500 Explorer dial was a gilt dial. That means it had gold lettering on the dial, not white text. If you do see one that's in immaculate condition and does have white text, maybe the lume is also white, that'll indicate that it's probably a service dial. But be so careful with these watches if you are interested in them, because there are some really, really bad examples out there today. And a lot of people buy these watches not knowing and end up not being the wiser when they get them. The 5500 evolved into the 14000, and at this stage, the Air-King became that primary example of an entry-level Rolex, one that was not overpriced or excessive in any way, but met the criteria of being an accurate chronometer that anyone could get in their hands. So the Air-King as we see it, I think it's pretty clear to say that it never reached the same heights that the GMT did, or the Explorer for that matter. You see what I did there? Heights, altitude. No. It's a watch that has always existed in the back catalogue, an entry-level watch next to the Oyster Perpetual, next to the Datejust. And we have to ask ourselves, over the decades, was the Air-King ever positioned as a professional's watch? How often was it advertised to the casual consumer as a pilot's watch? Was it ever seriously advertised with airplanes or on the wrists of captains? I mean, they printed Domino's Pizza logos on the dials of these watches at one stage. Can you imagine them doing the same with the Submariner or the Daytona? And you see, I don't think Rolex as a brand even saw this watch as anything special. And as we moved into the 2010s, well, the Air-King changed quite radically. Rolex at this stage was involved in creating custom dials and dash clocks for the Bloodhound SSC. This is a jet-powered supersonic land speed braking vehicle, and the interior, all of these components spoke the language of the future. And these dash gauges were gorgeous, the typeface was perfect, the handset chosen, the accent colors on the logo and the name. Could you imagine these becoming widely available and that we could all have them as either desk clocks or wall clocks in our homes? I mean, they look so good. This composition became the template for the dial of the new Air-King generation, debuted in 2016, and it really is fantastic. Original, unique, professional. We can all say that this configuration breathes new life into the pretty bland generation that came before it. What is quite baffling is that even though this watch received that modern facelift and it looked great, it still managed to fall by the wayside. It wasn't the popular choice. Could this be because the Air-King name has simply outlived its life? I made a video very recently about the Omega Ranchero and how that name pretty much killed the watch. I'll link it in the corner of the screen. Maybe a small percentage of owners today love this watch for its unique touch, but even still, it's a design that never really got off the ground, and these flying puns have to stop, I promise. The main shortcoming could have been because the Air-King was seen as a hodgepodge of parts from other models. You know, the white gold Arabics used from the previous generation Explorer, the case from the Milgauss, which was thicker to accommodate for an iron inner cage. The fact that the proportions for this piece were quite large, even considering that it's just a time-only reference. So this new edition has been heralded as the definitive change of direction, pushing the Air-King into the professional space finally. And to think a few months back we were almost 100% certain that this model was going to be discontinued. And this professionalism, the word used, is because of its slab side case, flip-lock clasp and crown guards, and the lack of the internal iron cage to protect the movement, because this new caliber is a great improvement over its predecessor. And much like how the previous generation debuted a never-before-seen dial, this generation now debuts a never-before-seen exterior. So I've just been sitting here having fun recording this until I realized that I have just sweated through this entire shirt, so quick change. That, ladies and gents, is why you wear a white shirt, especially when you're on camera. Right. Let's get back into it. So here's the thing. On one hand, it could be seen as a more sophisticated Air-King. I mean, it's got the professional case. On the other hand, though, it could also be seen as a more confused version of itself. You know, an equal amount of whimsy and professionalism, now more polarizing than ever. And this could be why opinions around it have been so divided. Now, the question is, where should the Air-King be, and could a small modification have made it better? One inclusion that makes this new model playful and maybe too cluttered is the use of lumed Arabics on the quarters. It feels so odd to say that a model like this has too much in such a small area, from the lines of text to the colors, the different typefaces. And there's one thing that no other professional Rolex with crown guards has, and that's numerals on its dial. To simply remove the quarter numerals and to add batons instead gives this new piece a sense of balance and symmetry. It also brings out the numerals and this speedometer effect they're trying to go for. I don't mean to be someone who enjoys his own work, designers should be quite apartial to their own work, but I really do enjoy this configuration far more than the one that we got. I feel that this pushes the direction of the watch further towards being a pilot watch and lessens the level of playfulness while still offering tons of details for you to enjoy. But with all of these changes on the new model, it looks almost completely different. And to circle back to the earlier questions, has the Air-King now found its footing, or has Rolex simply gone too far when it comes to adding the makeup? And should this watch just be put to rest? I guess it comes down to asking, what criteria does this watch meet? What areas does it fill that the others don't? We have the Oyster Perpetual line, we have the Explorer, the Milgauss, all of which have great established identities. As much as the backstory linked to the Air-King is great, it seems out of time. This model has never had the romance of summiting Everest or the joys of scientific discovery attached to it. It lacks narrative. But then you might ask, what does this watch offer? It offers a clean slate, a fresh perspective. It is the continuation of an old template that hasn't necessarily found its footing, but we could argue it holds a lot of 1950s elements that some of the more well-established designs might have suppressed over time. Even though this model embodies obscurity, it also has a sense of uniqueness that pushes its design beyond the stoic sterility of designs that are constantly repeated and reused by Rolex. The conclusion then is that since its debut in 2016, this new rendition of the Air-King has never tried to conform or be a part of Rolex's modern catalog. It has always stood out, and now even more so. And at this point, it's not a Frankenstein's monster of parts that have just been assembled together from other models. It's its own watch. And in a way, I feel like the design of this watch was handed over to a different department, maybe a younger group, an up-and-coming group who were given carte blanche to do whatever they wanted. Is this model jarring? Is it odd and one that doesn't really have a true identity? Yes. But is that not a good thing, considering that every other established model recycles and gradually evolves its formula instead of taking a step back and revising? And maybe that's a reason why so many are looking at this new Air-King with a fresh set of eyes. It's because it's not cliched, because it feels like quite a departure from Rolex's typical approach, and that even the disenfranchised might for the first time see the brand differently. Safe to say that this is one of the most interesting, head-scratching and perplexing evolutions offered in recent years from Rolex, that may inject some new life into future design approaches from the brand that will also continue to divide opinions, now more than ever. Holy sh**. Look at this! And that even the disenfranchised might for the first... I'm gonna cough out a lung.